Um, welcome to the Washtub of Wisdom. I appreciate you all. Yeah. Um, taking the moment to hear me out. I'm just a dude in the washtub, but I'm just trying to chill with y'all. Yeah. Some are stuck in the washtub. Yep, exactly. This is where we be. Step viewer, what are you doing? I'm stuck in the washtub. That's it. I just legit came out here to drink a beer and sit in my wash tub. It's everyone else that brings that extra energy. I'm telling you, I swear to God. I didn't come into the wash tub and just show up angry. I promise. It's just frustrating as an adult sometimes to have lack of conversation or to be forced to read chat that's like just kind of like partially skewed sentences. You know, we can start a non-profit for abused keyboards. Like, you too can donate 5 cents a day to take care of a keyboard that's been smashed by some weirdo on the internet. Give it a forever home. Give it to a kid that's gonna like actually like write a book or something. You know? In the arms of an angel. Oh, it kills me. Yeah, oh, I'm loving it, dude. I came out and sat in the wash tub, and I was like, this is a great way to just sit back and just not do anything. But 2 seconds, 2 days, 1 day, 5 hours, couple hours, 10 minutes, sit in the wash tub, whatever. Just don't do fuck all for a minute and just take it in. What kind of books do you write? I'm honestly into scientific journals and stuff. I mean, and whatever. I mean, I just literally burned through multiple books on cartomancy, moon phases, gardening with the moon phases. And I just reread Teeming with Microbes, Teeming with Nutrients, and Teeming with Fungi. I read Teeming with oh shit. I just said the 3 of them. It's not nutrients. It's not fungi. It's the other one. But I just read those from Jeff Lowenfels. Sorry, I've been smoking and drinking. I just read Teeming with Microbes publicly with folks. But I started getting back into it again so that I could understand more about the microorganisms in the soil and how they correlate. It's just so simple now. Understanding and being able to look at all of this and understand, why does it do that? Why did this do that? Huh? Why is it sticky? You got the sticky icky? Yeah, I do, but why? How did it do? Why the fuck did it do that over there? You know? Yeah, I like took a moment to read all of this and try and interpret it so other people stop asking me that in chat. Sorry. Yeah. I started writing my Medica Materia Marijuana about cannabis. And the last few things that I read was the history of cannabis in the North American United States. Hey, baby, how's it going? Sit back, relax, and let me show you something. This is a marijuana plant. Legal in California since, like, what, 96? Medically? I'm a medical marijuana patient. California was the first state in the North American United States to both make cannabis illegal, then make it legal again. Yeah. Back in the day, in like 1630s, we started settling in what we would later call the North American United States. In North America, first Canada, settlers start establishing up in the north and the northeast of North America. And at that time, we were still under the rule of the English. And one of the kings back then had made it law for people to cultivate hemp. At the time, it was something where they would say that you needed to cultivate a spoonful of hemp for about an acre of land. And so this law, this rule that had been going on for a long time in England and that part of the world, it had been made law in the North Americas. In North America, the early colonies like Massachusetts, Virginia, they literally made it law where all of the settlers in the colonies had to grow hemp. These people could also, at that period in time, use the cannabis hemp that they were growing as something to pay taxes. The taxes that they were bestowed as settlers that moved to this new land is like, hey, you get to do the thing as an English settler, but you gotta fucking pay to be here. Kind of like rent nowadays. It is unknown historically whether or not cannabis was actually in North America or it was introduced by others that settled to North America. There is no known historical records whether or not the Native Americans introduced cannabis to the folks that were settling with the Mayflower. And so in the 1600s, 1630s, it was about 1613, 1615 when they were settling in Canada before they got to those colonies. Cannabis was law. It was legal. And so the colonies began to establish. There was this tyranny, all this taxation that was going on. The taxation without representation.
Alert. Station is now code red.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something. Unfortunately there's hearsay, there's discussion, but there's no known. When I could say, I guess historically we could talk about it. There were talks, but there's no known records, like viable records regarding how it got there. No receipts, if you will. It can be accepted as something else. We could look at traces of past civilizations that were present and try and seek out these things. If we run across, early settlers or tribal group, nomadic group that was living in North American United States before it was North American United States, and we found that they had traces of like cannabis, then we can say that. But as at a certain point, we don't have enough records to indicate that that is a thing. So, yeah, you're drinking, I'm drinking. This is history. You want to call yourself a cannabis cultivator, you got to know your history. Come on. I'm an advocate. Sorry, you want to call yourself an advocate and you got to know this shit. So you have the early settlers, the colonies establishing, ruled under England still. It's law to cultivate cannabis. Eventually, you have the revolution, where eventually we do our best to secede from England. And when we secede from England, it actually was cannabis. One of these things, cannabis was one of the things that helped us separate ourselves from our tyrannical leaders in England as North American settlers. We were able to use the cannabis hemp as a resource. They used it to create fabric, paper, Later, they would create rope and stuff with it, and the stuff that would help make sails. But it was more important that we were able to create fabric and paper at the time, as a resource to do our own thing, because, you know, we cut ourselves off from the mainland at the time. As settlers, we lack certain resources, and so you have to become more self-sustainable. And so the cannabis is something that helped us become self-sustainable as early settlers in the North American United States, in the colonies. Yeah. And so we had that advantage. Eventually, you know, what was it? We talk about it. Our forefathers, the Declaration of Independence was drafted on hemp paper. Benjamin Franklin did a lot to cultivate cannabis and even bred cannabis, from what they were saying. The George Washington grew cannabis on his estate, and it was something that was major on plantations for a hell of a long time. Fast forward a little bit. We separate. We're our own colonies. We start establishing states. We, like, oh God. Little more than 100 years later, we're establishing states. We're capitalizing off of cannabis. We're using it as a crop that's viable for all of these things. Like I said, paper, fabric for hemp, fabric from hemp to make sails, rope, and it's something that was such a sustainable crop that it was just there, and like it was just at the time it was legal and okay, and we were just down with the thing. Get into the 1900s, the early 1900s. We start to discover other things we can do with the cannabis.
Got some Del Taco.
Sure, sweet. Del Taco, alright. We talked about it from the 1600s, settlers coming in, growing cannabis by law of England, using cannabis to cut themselves off from England, use it as a self-sustainable resource, use it as something that later becomes capital. Early states, like I described, Massachusetts, Virginia, those in the Northeast, they're using it as something that pays taxes, so it's legal. It's used as something as a viable resource for income, and everyone's growing it. We separate, we expand the states. The states are doing their thing with plantations. They're still growing cannabis in many a state. It's crazy. It was something that was a major crop that was growing for a while slavery was happening. There's a lot of history on hemp law and how it was grown in the Southeast while slavery was a thing with all of these plantations. We had described that. It was grown for fabric to make paper, fabric for sails, for rope. We fast forward to the early 1900s. Henry Ford comes to the situation. Cannabis is still legal. Henry Ford uses cannabis, hemp, as something for multiple things for his cars. He uses cannabis, hemp, for the frames of his cars. He creates a biofuel from cannabis hemp that is used to not only power the machines that created all of the factories and got his assembly line and all the vehicles going in the first place. He began to introduce it as a biofuel to run the vehicles. Oil tycoons don't like this at all, so they begin to lobby with politicians to make cannabis illegal. I had described earlier, California was the first state to make cannabis illegal thereafter. Slowly, the states begin to criminalize cannabis, the cultivation of cannabis as an industrial crop for hemp is made illegal. In the 1930s, you get this dude that creates the Marijuana Tax Act and establishes the DEA. This is the beginning of where it starts to become something majorly illegal. They don't like it because it's something that was introduced as something that would compete with oil tycoons. Thank you. Oh, yeah. So yeah, like I said, the Marijuana Tax Act comes to place. Cannabis becomes illegal as an industrial crop, except everywhere except Kansas. Kansas keeps cannabis hemp as an industrial crop because it's one of the only viable crops that will grow themselves in the shitty soil of Kansas. Yep. And so, yeah, it's made illegal because Henry Ford discovers how to make a biofuel out of it. The Marijuana Tax Act comes into play. Reefer madness is introduced as propaganda to make it seem like it's an issue with society. The racial discrimination comes into play in regards to the use of cannabis and how it will corrupt society. People of color are demonized while they create this propaganda to make marijuana, cannabis, something bad. 20 years later or so, you get Richard Nixon coming into play. And he, after the DEA is formed and spreading the propaganda of reefer madness, introduces the Controlled Substances Act, which adds marijuana with a H, THC, to the Schedule 1 listing of this Controlled Substances Act, making it illegal altogether to do anything with in the North American United States. Cannabis at the time becomes a symbol of freedom and rebellion against the man, the government, during that period when we see the freedom movement, the hippies and everything. They use it as something, as one of those, they use it as an ideal. It's something that heals, it's something that makes you happy, it spreads wellness, you know, and it's something that the man said, no, this is bad. And so it became something that was weaponized by hippies to portray like how the man is so bad. And then you could see why. There was no reason that it was made bad. It wasn't something that was killing people. It wasn't something that people of color were using to corrupt society as the government portrayed. Unfortunately, the freedom movement dies off. Vietnam ends. We kind of just commit to a ceasefire and pull out. And the people that were leading this movement grow up. And they move on to what was the norm, and the reefer madness propaganda that was spread over that period of 30 years plus ingrains itself into society. At that point in the 70s, the Marijuana Tax Act, the Controlled Substances Act are in play. The government is cracking down and destroying crop and making it illegal to cultivate. How it was up until that point is changed altogether. You couldn't go out and grow outside like we do now without the man flying overhead and just fucking arresting everyone doing the thing. The era of the indoor cultivator emerges in the 80s. Hydroponics grow chambers, grow tents rise. People who wish to continue doing the thing take what plants they have, preserve them. At that point where we had lost a lot of crop in the 70s from the government cracking down and destroying what was happening in the North American United States, we lost a lot of cultivars. The genotype producing certain chemotypes and phenotypes was no longer viable. For a few decades, we begin to see an era where people go behind closed doors, regardless of what was legal, illegal. And a whole different era started. They call it the black market. The black market's been around since the dawn of time. If people wanted to sell avocados and there was regulation, there are people that are going to sell avocados regardless of the regulation. It just is how it is. Sorry. Then, like I said, California becomes the first state in North American United States to legalize it once again in the mid-90s, 1996 or so. And from there on, we emerge into a whole different space with cannabis culture. We start to see the benefits of it once again. We play the idea of how it can be used responsibly, recreationally. Alaska, Colorado, Washington become the first states to legalize it recreationally. Many states follow suit thereafter. In my time as a medical cannabis user, I've watched more than 25 states in the North American United States legalize it in one way or another. And we are in a whole different situation compared to what it was when we started as a country. It's crazy. You go from it being something that's mandatory to grow in an acre, a spoonful of hemp an acre, to something where it's scrutinized, regulated, and you could only grow in certain places. In California alone, there are potentially 2,500 combinations of cannabis law. And we're finally getting to a point where we can do the thing without so much scrutiny from the government. We may be at a point where we can grow cannabis like we did almost 300 years ago. It's crazy. But a lot of people don't know this information. That's the last thing that I read. That's the last thing that I studied. I try and do more than portray that I'm just some stoner in a washtub getting fucked up. And I hope that you were able to take in this information in a manner and understand more about cannabis that's healthy and not just pop culture burnout stoner bullshit. Yeah.